Good evening to you all, and warm welcome to John Kineman. Many thanks to Dr. John Kineman that he squeezed his time in the morning at 5 o'clock at Colorado, and he is made available for us to give this talk. His topic is Wholeness as a Template for Nature. Wholeness as a Template for Nature. A brief introduction about Professor John Kineman. Dr. John Kineman is a semi-retired systems ecologist and systems theorist, a PhD in ecological and general systems theory from the University of Colorado, Boulder. His career spans diverse scientific disciplines, including physics, geophysics, and environmental sciences. Over 27 years, he contributed to the United States government, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration as a geophysicist, physical ecologist, and data information scientist. He also conducted wildlife research with the Kenya Wildlife Development Department and the Kirosha Research Station in Rwanda. So now he accepted our invitation. He is with us. I have been associating with John Kineman for the past 20 years, and we did some of the works relating to the informatics scientists. Thank you, one and all. Now, I request Dr. John Kineman to proceed with his PPT presentation. And with regard to any questions, queries during his presentation, please put in the chat box. At the end, we'll discuss. Let us not disturb him in between. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. It's a very interesting institute, and I understand that most of the people are interested in technology development and looking at ideas that originate in the Vedas. And that is also something that I have been very interested in. When I came to India many years ago, I discovered that there was a tremendous overlap between the theory work that I was doing and the Vedas and Upanishads and some of the holistic templates that are presented in that culture and philosophy and history and amazing legacy in India. It really blew my mind when I saw the similarities. So I'll present some of that today, and hopefully you'll get a flavor of it. I consider this introductory talk introducing me and my work. I have a tendency, as Professor Kripanidhi knows, to create very complicated, busy slides. You'll see some of the work that I've done, and I'll explain some things, but in the interest of time, I won't go into great detail on a lot of it. So let's see how it goes. So first of all, my research really highlights 4 areas. Most of my work in my career with NOAA and elsewhere was in systems ecology, and toward the end of my work into sustainability, Professor Kripanidhi will recognize these images in the upper left here as work we were doing in India with ecological niche modeling. And it turns out that that work figures very importantly in the theory work that I started doing toward the end of my career. Actually, not toward the end, but in the last 15 years, 20 years. And this is holon theory, which I will explain in the talk. It turns out that niche modeling fits this quadrant. And when we try to develop a system to do what holons do, we need this kind of modeling to plug in here. Um, and what I'm going to propose in this talk, which we'll get to at the end, is that we can build a new informatics system using the help of artificial intelligence. And I'm hoping that maybe we'll get some interest in this group to develop this. And why do I want to do it? Well, I've been looking at global crises, and in particular, the recent phenomenon of post-truth, which some of you may be familiar with in 2016, when Professor Kripanidhi and I organized a conference on global sustainability. The Oxford English Dictionary, which selects a term, a word of the year, chose the word post-truth to characterize 2016 and the era that we were entering. And it's an era of information destruction, basically. And as you will see, a whole system depends on information. These are the information components. And if we destroy information, we destroy the system. So I'm hoping that we can develop some technology that will guide artificial intelligence in a more naturalistic way. Okay, a lot of words there. Let's move on. So what is wholeness? Well, we have the Vedanta view and relational system science. I was working in this area, developing concepts of for-cause loop causality, identity. A causal loop creates an identity in mathematics. And the model is also a mind-body relation. Modeling relations is a term that Robert Rosen, my mentor, used. He's passed away now. And then I developed the idea of a holon. It applies to what may underlie consciousness, and it even amazingly seems to describe the symmetry of the Higgs field. So I'm thinking that the holon is a universal template for cosmic order, which in the Vedic view is SRIVT. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this and much more. On the Vedanta side, there are many four-part unities, Panchakosha, Panchabhuta, and so on. Three-part unities, Sat Chit Ananda, karmic relations, the idea of the material world being like this stage of a play. And in particular, we'll see Shiva's cycle of life, of birth and death, and cycle of renewal. Pardon me 1 second. And this identity I spoke of, when you have a mathematical causal loop that forms an identity, well, we can take that as, of course, not the same thing, but as a mathematical construct that points to and allows us to think about Atman Brahman. So to get across the idea of the holon, I wanted to present a metaphor, and I thought that the celebration of Holi would be a good one. You can see if I get it right, if I get the interpretation right. But from what I understand, Holi is a celebration of good over evil, occurring last month, I guess. And if we look at this, this is basically how a holon would work. There are four causal components, and in rough terms, it's action, doing, existing, being, and this would be the final cause quadrant. It would be imagining or renewing. This would be the fire in Shiva's left hand in the circle of fire, where the ego is surrendered and burned up. to bring about a new understanding. Here's jnana, jnana, karma, dharma, meditation, dhyana. And so that's knowing. So this is my understanding of what holy is all about. And it isn't just a party. It isn't just having fun. If we understand the meaning of it as surrendering our negativity and the triumph of good over evil, and then manifesting, this is the mind, and this is the body, manifesting that understanding, we then create a worldly ceremony to represent it. So, in other terms, on earth as above. So I hope that works a little bit, but I will have other examples of what a hold-on means. Here's one from M.C. Escher's work, hand drawing a hand. And the hold-on is really in philosophy, it would be called a dual aspect monism. It's not a duality. It's a single unity in nature, or it describes. It's an analytical view, of course, but it describes something that is unified, but we don't know what the unified entity is. What we see are the two aspects. We see mind, we see body, we see subjects and objects. Well, this is the subject drawing the object and the object drawing the subject. So one could be thought of as a model and the other is a natural existence of some kind, an objective. And the drawing of it in these two places, that's information. So what holds the duality together is information. And I'll mention later the mathematical system that this is in called category theory, which I suppose many people here already know about, perhaps better than I do. But I use a graphical form of category theory and mostly draw pictures. I'm very visual. Here's a quote from the invocation to the Isha Upanishad. Nature is whole, we are whole, taking whole from whole, or adding whole to whole. The result is whole. That is a perfect statement of what hold-ons are all about, and how when you put hold-ons together, they make larger hold-ons, and they're also decomposable into smaller hold-ons. Ultimately, the entire universe is interconnected in that way. Well, where did my ideas come from? My mentor is Robert Rosen. Unfortunately, I never got to meet him because he passed away 1 year before, well, even 6 months before he was supposed to come to a conference that I invited him to in California. But his books are amazing, and they completely changed my outlook on science and reality. And that's what led me to appreciate what I found when I went to India with my wife. This is Rosen's modeling relation, and you can see the sort of thing I've been talking about so far, where you have a formal system. He was a mathematical biologist, really a genius. But this is a formal system that has mathematical rules. So this is where we would create models, and this is nature, a natural system. And he's simply describing science. He's saying in science we make models. We look at nature and we encode a model. So this is observation and measurement, and this is encoding a formal model. But then we decode the model to make a prediction, and then we test the prediction to see if we were right. Well, the theory that I'm presenting takes this a little bit farther, and it says, well, this works for science because it's the way nature works. And we got science from a natural inheritance. And this is actually a causal loop. And that's the loop that would be that I developed into a holon using Rosen's work. He really had two theory tracks. One was looking at modeling relations in a philosophical way, and then the other was looking at category theory analytically. And he didn't put the two together, but that's what I did to get the holon. I'll just make a little note here that I think, no, maybe not. Okay, I'll just make a note that a mathematician doesn't draw the arrows in the same direction. Notice this one goes backwards. That's just a convention. That's like a little note to the mathematician and anyone looking at this to say, this isn't a complete cycle. It's open. So there is a cycle here, a causal loop, but there may be other influences also. So it's not a perfect connection. So that's just a little, it doesn't mean that much. But we'll see how that works later. If I can get the next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay, so here's what I did. I took Rosen's theory of category relations, and this is category theory notation. You have an algebraic form of category theory, and you have a graphical form of category theory with arrows and lines. And the type of arrowhead makes a difference. The open arrow is a material transition of some kind. And well, let's go here. And the solid arrow is a function. So this is a function causing a state change from X to S, okay? And that's all this says, is that this function operates on X to produce S. And this is normal science. This is what mainstream traditional classical science does. You have F equals ma as the equation of motion in Newtonian science, and it's describing how states change. But as Erwin Schrödinger pointed out in his book, What is Life? We have in science a way of going from a function to an end state, but we don't have a way of going from a state to a function. Well, that's what we're adding. This is the inverse causality that goes from a state, operates on something to produce a new function. So where do we get the functions of nature? They come from nature also. Whereas in the traditional classical way that we're still locked into the mechanistic view of reality, it's a top and bottom hierarchy where functions just exist and are given, and eventually all the states run down to heat death at the end of time. But in the Vedic view and in this relational science view, that's not the case. It's a cycle. And there's a great deal to be done in physics to understand that cycle. I think a lot of physics is understanding that in different terms, but I think if we understood it in these terms, it would simplify many things and we would go farther. The causality involved here, if you think of each of these arrows as being one of the four causes, is Aristotle's four causes. Our traditional science focus on efficient and material, that's state and dynamics, just like Newtonian dynamics. And we try to explain everything that way. But the mind operates inversely on final and formal cause. I had to redefine these terms a little bit because final cause is not some external purpose. It's an example, and you'll see it. You'll see that in the later slides. So this is the holon, and these are the four causes: final, formal, efficient, material. And I'll give another example of how you apply this and think about it in a specific case. But it's basically a causal loop, and these arrows are not arbitrary. everything means something. The dashes are the abstract, mental, contextual side of existence, the subjective existence, and the solid arrows are the way we explain substantial or material objective existence. And the thing is, this is the mind-body problem, right? And there is no known solution to the mind-body problem. We can't come up with a mathematical system that will describe both. Just like in quantum theory, it's a complementarity where you need a description of the mind and a description of the material, but you can't get one description for both. But they can inform each other, and they do, obviously, because when we think about moving, something moves. So clearly there's a mind-body connection, but it's very difficult for scientists to work that out and mathematicians to work that out. The connection between the mind and body in category theory can be described as a functor, F-U-N-C-T-O-R. And they invented that idea to relate categories. So this is one category, that's another category. The functor is what relates the categories. And as we'll see, since this doesn't exist alone, there are other holons throughout nature that can interact with this in any one of the four quadrants. The functor can't be fully formalized, but it can be understood and formalized to a degree for each specific case or each specific application. Notice the Indus Valley Saraswati Basin seals that I've placed here. This is showing you the Vedic connection. For instance, well, obviously with the swastika, which is a symbol of divine existence, that's what the term translates to, as I understand the translation. You see the four quadrants and the implicit cyclicity of it, movement of it. And in this particular seal, they even put pointers from an outside container into each of the four quadrants to emphasize the fourness of that cycle. If you look at the symbols on the yogi seal here, the first one, it's always right to left, the first one is a symbol of the universe or of fertility, procreation, origin. You notice it has 4 ticks on it. I don't know how other people interpret those, but I think that's quite interesting. You'll see that symbol showing up with the 4 ticks on other seals as well. And there's also a very interesting thing that I'll mention later. What is this showing? I think it's showing a counting system that's different from the way we normally count things. So here's another example. I'll step through this quickly and not get too bogged into it. Let's see how we're doing with time. Yeah, I got to move on. So let's say this lady here has an idea and she wants to build a house. Well, her idea comes from where? Does it come from the universe, the way a top-down thinking would have it? Or does it come from another house that she saw? It comes from a prior example of a house, and she has a creative interpretation of that to imagine a new home. So she creates a model of a home based on other houses that she saw. Or if you never saw a house, your model of a house would be based on maybe a cave or a tent. That model then is encoded or formalized in terms that could be actually implemented. So in here, she talks to an architect or designer, and he draws up blueprints and makes all the plans. So formal cause is planning. Final cause is imagining or actually anticipating. Robert Rosen wrote a book called Anticipatory Systems. And so this is anticipating, this is planning. So now then the architect talks to the builder, which is now he's the functor. He's the one who's going to connect the idea with the world. And then he talks to the builder, to the workers. These are your efficient cause, action quadrant. This is where activity is initiated. This whole lower part is the physical, dynamical world. So here's the job site. And then you can observe this house taking shape, and you can interact with this house. And that's material cause, is what it's composed of and what it is as an existence, which then sums up to a house. And we repeat the cycle for the next one. So hopefully that gives you an idea what I mean by this holistic cycle. Now, Robert Rosen, one of the things that he did that was very important was this diagram. And here he's looking at only the efficient maps. This is only the worldly side of things. So this is a function and a state change. And he's looking at efficient cause, and he's trying to explain how living systems are different than non-living systems. And what he concluded is that it's a closure of three functions: the metabolism, replication, and repair function. And you can see the closures here. You can see that a function from this node operates on some component, causes it to produce this component. That component produces a function which causes this to produce a code. So this is replication. It makes a copy of that. And this would be your genetic code, for instance. And then that code becomes a function that operates on this component to produce the original component that does metabolism. So it ends up being an internal closure of these functions. He only showed this diagram. I said, well, organisms exist in the environment, which of course he knew. He was just trying to make a point about the internal organization. Well, we get a complete closure when we add the environment. Now we have this one producing behavior and resources being brought in because of the behavior. And so it closes a number of loops. The behavior then closes to selection, and the species also become resources for other species. So now we have a four cause, we have a five function closure. The thing about this is he didn't talk about the higher causes. Somehow we have this problem of how does this state produce a function? It's not said. And that was Schrodinger's problem. He says, well, we know how a function changes states, but where in the diagram do we show how the state produces, how this S produces the F? Well, that's what the upper part of the holon does. So this diagram of a living system as a holon is an exact representation of Rosen's diagram, adding the higher causes, and it turns out to be a four-cause closed loop that forms an identity. Well, I can't spend too much time. To get an idea of the fundamental and I think profound change in thinking that this represents, let's look at how we thought before of mechanistic science. What if this is what's going on underneath? This is what nature is really doing. And you have complexity. And if the foundation is complex, And we only look at the material side of it, the state and dynamics, and we develop mechanistic science and keep looking only at the state and dynamics and don't consider the mind, we run into paradoxes. And of course, there are many, especially in cosmology, which is another area that interests me. And so we end up with a kind of agnosticism, a heuristic science, which is where physics has arrived now. It's no longer explanatory. It's just, we've decided that there are certain things we can't know, but it's because we're looking at it as a machine. And there are non-mechanical parts to it or components to it. But we get to this point, why didn't it work? And the paradigm today is literally shut up and calculate. Don't interpret the Einsteinian reality. Einstein's reality concept is not considered valid in its statistical mechanics. You just crunch the numbers and get an answer, and they work. But I think real science needs to understand, because when you understand, you can do more and you can explain more things. We can't explain life. We have no definition of life in this system except for what it looks like. And we can't explain consciousness. And really, we can't explain cosmology either until we go to a more holistic view. And when we do, you can see that it then invokes these aphorisms, which are absolutely correct, from Da Vinci: learn how to see, realize that everything connects to everything else. And holons do that. There's a holarchy of connected holons. And Aristotle, in all things in which the whole is something beside the parts, there is a cause. So he's saying there is a higher cause for the transcendence of whole systems over their parts. Again, back to the correlation with the Vedas and symbols we saw before, like the swastika. I'm saying it absolutely correlates with the holon view. Notice the swastika shows up in every major religion in the world. And then I'm also showing that this Indus seal correlates extremely well also. If you'll notice, this is a unicorn. I don't think any of us have ever seen a unicorn in the wild because they don't exist as real animals. So it's a mythical creature, and sometimes it's associated with Krishna. This looks like a scimitar oryx, but that also is mythical because, first of all, the antlers are pointed in the wrong direction. And secondly, the scimitar oryx doesn't occur in India, or didn't. It's from Arabia. So it would be known only to certain rishis who traveled, or maybe traders, but it wouldn't be commonly known. So these two symbols, I think, are chosen to represent an abstract world. You look at the material side and you see that it's a very normal looking bull, and the body would be the existence of it. The head represents the dynamical side, making day-to-day decisions about where to go, food, and that sort of thing. Here's higher mind, guiding the day-to-day material mind. And this would be, looking backwards, would be the effect of what you did on cultivating the future. And there's your cycle. The Western derived modern scientific world doesn't see a cycle. This is a hierarchy. So you have final cause coming from the top, going through here to material cause, and going to a heat death, and where everything dies, which I don't think is true. Another example of a cycle would be the mantra Om, just chanting Om, which is the sound of the universe. And Here's one interpretation I found of it. A, observing awareness. U, the dreaming state. M, consciousness, deep sleep. Well, when we're chanting Om, we're not involved in shopping and day-to-day activities. So it doesn't include the active world. And in a whole-on view, here it is. A-U-M, and the active world is the other part of it, which we're transcending. Well, okay, I won't even attempt to explain this. You can look at, here I put together many four-cause frameworks. I will try to explain the dancing Shiva briefly, but you can see the correlation with all these other frameworks. And here in this blue one is the interpretation of dancing Shiva. So you'll notice there's 4 quadrants in this wheel of fire. If we begin, where do we want to begin? Let's begin here with the sash. The sash is wrapped around the core of the body, and this would be stabilizing. This would be the existence, the material existence. And as we go up here, we get into his left hand holding fire, which is death, dissolution, or renewal and regeneration. Burning the ego, as in my holy cycle that I showed earlier. The crown, of course, higher consciousness, higher awareness, standing on one foot, standing on the world, on the ego. So this is your Maya. And as you go to the right hand, drum beat. This was, remember, if you recall, this is formal cause, planning, designing. Well, the drum beat is the drum beat of life and existence of the world, things marching on. And then here, both the arm and the leg are in this quadrant, active, action. So again, you see the same 4-cause cycle. So I've been talking about single loops, but the important point now is, once we understand how they work and we have the mathematics for them, we have a way of understanding how they combine. Here's a combination of 3 hold-ons that close in this quadrant. And so this one closes to this one, which closes to this one, which closes back to the original one. So these are 3 hold-ons that together form 1 hold-on. And that's the analytical nature of this thinking. You can get the closures in any one of the 4 quadrants, just cross the arrows, and the hold-ons are closed. So this would be a first-order closure, in this case in the dynamic quadrant. So this would be 2 systems that have the same dynamics. This would be the one I showed earlier, the way life closes with 5 hold-ons. So you have the main one, which is the organism, and then you have 4 internal components, which establish each of these 4 causes and the internal functions that are closed. And so you get a complete closure, but it's only complete with the environment, as we saw before. Therefore, it's open to the entire universe, but it is mathematically closed, and you can analyze it that way. This shows all of the ways that 2 hold-ons can be related to each other. And this is just an example from my work in ecosystem management. This is a coupling of a management system with a natural system. So as the natural system has certain drivers, and pressures, and state, this is the European Union DPSIR framework. You get, the ecological status of the system. Well, that might then feed into a management context where we make certain plans about how to manage the system. We enact those plans and actions. Those have certain results. And those results then go back into the ecosystem context. And we see that the ecosystem changes as a result of our management plan. And of course, in C.S. Holling's work on adaptive management, ideally, we would go through this cycle many times to tune it so that the management approach and aligns and harmonizes with what is going on in the ecosystem itself. And it's so we stabilize this through management. But if we don't keep iterating this loop, we can come up with a stupid management plan that just messes things up worse than they were. And so we have to keep going back and reevaluating and looking for the harmony between the two systems. Okay, an example of what I mean by causal closure. And you see this is just the hold-on cycle we were looking at. I just copied it and made another one and said, well, these, and then flipped it around. So this is left to right, flipped. And so these are two whole systems, in this case, people, that are closed in the final cause quadrant, which is anticipation, anticipating the future. Well, so what we're seeing here is two people sharing the same anticipated future. And I think, you know, we can all understand that. Just because they have the same anticipation of the future doesn't mean they do things the same. They have their own separate dynamics. It doesn't mean that they interpret things in the same way. They have their own interpretations. And it doesn't mean that they think the same way. They have their own separate contextual models. They live in different worlds, but they have come together to share an anticipated future. Well, that's what the hold-on analysis does. The important thing about it is, okay, we know they're anticipating a future, but this shows and emphasizes the other parts. And if we were to do an analysis, we would then look at these other aspects and see what's driving them. Maybe this one is being driven by work, and this, or, you know, and this one is being driven by family. And so you can build that out to see other drivers of the system and understand what's making it function. Check my time here. Yeah, I'm close to the end here. I think I better move forward. So here's another example in science, testing a hypothesis. They're sharing an interpretation, a reflection, hypothesis. And of course, in science, we want replication. So just because this fellow gets a good closed loop in his testing, that's not good enough. In science, we want that to be replicated by somebody else in their context. And if they agree, you know, then we're getting more confidence in the result. So this is describing hypothesis testing. Here we're looking at how two different contextual systems govern the same dynamical system. One example, more mundane example, could be this is the kitchen and this is the husband and the wife with different ideas about how to manage the kitchen. Here I'm showing quantum theory and Newtonian theory as different systems, and you end up with a complex dynamics, both in the kitchen case and in the physics case, you end up with complex dynamics. Another way of combining them is two material systems that share the same laws, the same contextual model. And when that happens, this is an analogy because they have a similar, they share a model. So there's something about each one that's the same. This is where we get emergence. And you can see I just used the architectural example here of the Hindu architecture and the Muslim Islamic architecture, and you have an Indo-Islamic architecture as an emergent system. And there are many examples of how this works. This is extremely important because this is a clear explanation of how you get emergence in systems. And I also added this idea of counting here. I mean, we're used to counting separate things. These have to be discrete objects. 1 apple, 2 apples, 3 apples. But if I'm going to add 1 apple and 1 house, I have to say, oh, well, you just have 2 things. We have to just reduce it all to things, and that's why this is very reductionistic. Whereas what's going on in nature is counting systems. So if you have any 2 things, you also have 3, because the 2 can form a system, or can always be considered. You can always add the whole, just like in the Isha Upanishad invocation, the whole is inside a whole. So this is how the Vedic counting system works. And you get this sequence, which is 1 less than the binary sequence. So, getting to the end of my talk now, where do I want to go with this? I've been looking at AI, and you've been noticing throughout the presentation some pretty impressive pictures. These were generated in the last couple of days using ChatGPT and DALL-E. And these pictures that you've been seeing of holy and here, and this is just an abstract representation of what AI itself does. We have the words, of course, of the different layers of AI. But AI is based on human information and disinformation, and it can go wrong. I want to use the hold-on logic to guide the development of artificial intelligence and to create a system that will only produce things that are holistic in a natural sense. And I think that could get us much closer to artificial general intelligence. And it can eliminate a lot of the evils, I think, of artificial intelligence. But there's a danger, of course. And gee, I think I am a little late on my presentation here, so I'm going to have to go through quickly here. But what I want to do now there is build the holistic informatics system to achieve artificial general intelligence in a naturalistic way, because that's not there now. That's not in AI currently. There is no model for naturalness or wholeness. And we can get some very strange results from AI, also the amazing results that you've been seeing throughout the presentation. We are facing a post-truth dilemma. This is another AI-generated image. This took about 2.5 minutes to generate based on a 1-sentence prompt. That's the power of this technology. And it's everywhere now. It's even guiding jets in wartime. We have self-driving cars. We now have self-driving fighter jets. If this doesn't scare us, I don't know what would. And so I want to use that to try to resolve this post-truth crisis. And hold-ons are not necessarily good. You can have a whole system that does evil. And I think the pandemic and the social viruses that the internet viruses that we've seen, the media virus, political virus, we have a perfect storm in 4 dimensions of society, in science, in politics, in society, and in corporations and government. And it's a negative spiral, and it's very scary. But I think by introducing the hold-on technology, we can turn that and encourage a positive future where we see a holistic cycle that is self-reinforcing and also harmonious with other parts of the world, whereas these things are not. And this is where we get, again, taking some a Vedic view of human values, which is, Professor Kripanidhi is familiar with this from Prashanti Narayan in Puttaparthi, Sai Baba's human values work. And one of his quotes is, untruth might appear to overpower truth, but its victory would fade away and truth would establish itself. And that's the goal here. So finally, I did get to my last slide. And nobody gave me the hook. I'm looking at this image here, this two-part image was also created in about 2 or 3 minutes by DALL-E, accessing through ChatGPT, based on, a 1 or 2 sentence description of contrast a natural world future with an AI-driven world future. And this is what AI produced. And you'll notice humanity is now a skeleton. If there is a natural world, we're not in it. This is our world. And again, if that doesn't scare you, I think it should. So thank you. And I think it's time for questions.
Thank you, Dr. John Kineman, sir, for the nice presentation. Now the presentation is open for discussion. In the chat box, it is written by one of the experts, Dr. Srinivas. What is RTA?
RTA, Rita. That's one of the central concepts in the Rig Veda. People don't know exactly what it is because the concept refers to cosmic order. It's the idea of the way reality works is Rita. And because it is beyond our comprehension, we don't have exact descriptions of it. What you have is the descriptions of the 4-cause cycle, like Panchabhuta, Panchakosha. And those are the way Rita manifests in the material world.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, our director Sastry sir has given expansion of Rita, RTA is Ruta.
Yeah.
Ruta, R-U-T-A, Ruta.
Rita, okay.
Rutagam Satyam, Rutagam Satyam.
Rutagam Satyam Parabrahmam.
Rutagam Satyam Parabrahmam.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, Rutagam Satyam. Yes, very good.
Very good.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, I'm sure the spelling is different in different places. There's actually a conference that took place on Ruta and Rutam, and it's very interesting. It's one of the few books on it. I can send a link. I can put that in the chat box if you want.
Dr. B.V.K. Sastry garu, how are you?
I am fine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Dr. John, we have been discussing these matters on the SBOC and other places. So I still am looking for the consciousness matter relations, what you have been talking about. So I would like you to highlight that issue to this group.
Consciousness, Chat Pradat, Chit Pradat.
Yes, Chit Padartha.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the hold on. I think that is the hold on. It's a matter-mind relation, and I don't see it as material versus consciousness. I see it as material versus mind, and those two together form a world. But the cycle, the movement between mind and matter is conscious. So consciousness is the information. It's the functors. Of course, this is just a mathematical analysis, so it's not the real thing, right? But the hold-on shows a information link between mind and material, and that's not formalizable in mathematics. So it's rather abstract and mystical. Those functors, that's where I would place consciousness. Consciousness is what's connecting mind and material. Now that goes against some philosophies in Vedanta and in Hinduism, because we have the idea that consciousness was primary and then the world came out of consciousness. Well, it doesn't really contradict that, because if that holon is what describes nature, if that's the natural template, it goes back to, actually there is no beginning, it goes back forever. And literally that conscious whole is what produces the cycle of life and death and all that exists. Is that kind of neat?
You are right. The Indian schools, we focus upon the knowledge explanation, what we technically call as jnana, jignasa, discussion, part of that. How to describe it. When it comes to the science teams, it is, as you say, shut up and measure, mimamsa. So that's the thing. Yeah, so the consciousness description is a part in Vedanta, and then measure is a part in Mimamsa. Connecting the two is yoga.
Yes.
That precisely is what we need to bring out as a integration of the East and West sciences. I look for your views on that.
You may have noticed that one of my holon diagrams had various yogas in the 4 quadrants.
Yeah.
And so if you think that there's 4 basic yoga pathways, and then there's the 5th one, which is the whole, which is Raja Yoga.
Yeah.
So you have dhyana, meditation in the existence, in the material quadrant.
Yeah.
You have dhyana yoga in the upper left.
Yeah.
And then you have devotion, bhakti in the upper right, and then you have karma yoga in the lower left. So you have the 4 yogas combining into Raja Yoga. It's a holon.
Yes, true. Thank you for that explanation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So John Kineman, one more question, one more query, sir.
Okay.
How the abstract functions are generated for an operator?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. How are the abstract functions generated by an operator? Is it? Well, it's a problem because, as I said, the holon itself has no general formalization. So we can't say universally or generally how the functions come from, what the context does for those functions. But when you look at a specific system, we can do empirical science and we can do inductive inference to figure out the laws or the rules of that context. Of course, that's exactly what was done in quantum theory. And they ended up with statistical laws to describe how the material world behaves. And that's perfectly fine. That fits the holon description. I think we can go farther than that. I kind of agree with Schrodinger that statistical mechanics is too limited. He hated it. And he said, if I realized that they were going to take my ideas, the Schrodinger wave equation, and develop statistical mechanics, I would have had nothing to do with it. Because he, like Einstein, believed that there was a deeper understanding that could be put in causal terms. And that's what the holon does. An example is when I applied it to life, and I came up with that holon you saw for living systems. I had to decide, well, okay, what are the functions? How does the context create the functions, the metabolism, replication, and repair? What are the rules that I'm going to use for the contextual side? Well, I reasoned that they would be simple, they would be parsimonious, and they wouldn't involve components that aren't already in the system. Once you get units of nature, enzymes, whatever coming together that give us those three functions, and they start to close with each other, I don't want to have to add new things or new assumptions to say what goes on. I want to say, well, it's only going to evolve if it works with what it already has. So I ended up with very simple combinatorics. So two, like you were seeing, combining holons, two models or two contexts, when they join, you get that emergence. Well, that's where we get metabolism. We have two natural units that are whole in themselves coming together to produce metabolism. So they can maintain themselves, and they can also produce metabolism. So when I just used simple combinatorics, it turned out that there had to be three and only three organism types. And, I was a little bit naive. I didn't even know that was the case, in fact, in taxonomy until I looked it up. And sure enough, those three types correlate precisely with what we see in taxonomy. You have the eukaryote type, and you have archaea and bacteria. But remember, I had 4-quadrant holes, so I'm thinking, oh my God, well, there's only 3 organism types from this theory. There's something wrong, because there should be 4 if it's, if the theory is consistent all the way through. Well, then I realized there is a 4th type. It's a proto-organism. It's not an organism, but I had left it out because the other 3 types are a repair type, archaea. It mostly is focused strategically on repairing itself. There's a metabolic type, us, eukaryotes, plants, which are very creative and innovative with resources and energy. And so their strategy is metabolic. And then there's the replicative type, bacteria, and their strategy is to reproduce and go everywhere and fill functions. So the missing type was a selective type, a self-selector. Well, that became very important.
So do you think that in order to achieve artificial general intelligence, AI should acquire consciousness?
No, that's it. No, I don't think it needs consciousness to achieve AGI.
Okay. It is my privilege to say a vote of thanks for this particular talk given by Professor John Kineman. John Kineman has chosen the topic Wholeness as a template for the nature for today, Silver Jubilee celebrations of SRIVT, Srimaharshi Research Institute of Vedic Technology. We are glad to have you, sir, as one of the speakers in this, what is it called, celestial activity. And sir has explained, John Kineman has explained vividly the Holon theory. Also, he has explained the Vedic philosophy through mathematics by putting the various models. And he has also correlated Shiva wheel, that is cycle of life, with the Holon, that is cyclic causality. And he also related to Holy Festival, the festival of colors, how Holon works, that is for doing, knowing, purging, and being. So like this, he has taken several examples. And he has also narrated a nice stanza, that is nature is whole. Stanza that you have given, sir. We'll make use of this in our activities here at SRIVT. Through casual loops, he elaborated the philosophy through mathematical interpretation. He elaborated this philosophy, Indian philosophy. Being an American, he studied well Indian terminology, Vedic terminology, and all those things, sir. Many, many thanks to you, sir. So thanks to you all. We wish you to be one of the speaker in the coming, what is it called, our Silver Jubilee celebrations on 31st August and 1st October, sir. We wanted to have you physical presence here in India.
I hope so.
Yeah, please. Thank you. Thank you, Ananda.
Thank you all. And we are all we are expecting you all in our upcoming Silver Jubilee celebrations. including International Vedic Conference in coming August 31st and September 1st. सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्तिः 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 सर्वे जनाः सुखिनो भवन्तु।
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.